Hi, I'm Kathy Stevenson, and we're here at Expo West this year, live from the floor. And we have a couple guests here today to talk about sustainability, clean label, processing, and a few other hot topics with consumers. And I know we've seen it all over the show, and it's a really important part of the show. So if you can introduce yourself, Tom.
Sure, happy to do that. My name is Tom Verheil. I'm the VP of Strategic Insights North America for Innova Market Insights. And I've been active in the industry for over 3 decades. I've been to probably over 20 of these shows. So I've seen a lot over the years and certainly involved in new product reporting analysis and seeing what consumers care about. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Webb Gerard. I'm the Senior Director of Research and Development for Cullinex. I've been doing product development for over 20 years, really focusing on natural and clean label products in that time.
Just a little bit of product development in your background there. So if it's edible, you've done it. So Tom, I know that you recently were on stage at the show and you did a pretty extensive discussion about sustainability and consumer behavior and choices. So we'd love to hear some of the top lines of that and what you shared with the group here at Expo West.
Well, the sustainability is something it's not static. It's something that has changed over time. And what we're finding out is that looking at the new product launches that we're monitoring, and here at Innova Market Insights, we're monitoring the launch of over 350,000 new product launches a year from 90 countries. So one of the top sustainability claims we're seeing is about traceability, where consumers want to know more about where ingredients come from. They want to know more about what's in the product, where it came from, how it was processed, and so on. Carbon emissions is also something companies are very interested in communicating to consumers, that they're doing something positive about that. And a couple areas that are really up and coming when it comes to sustainability include the use of upcycled ingredients. Seen a lot of that at the show today, and some companies are probably not talking enough about that because that can save a lot of natural resources using those upcycled ingredients. So those are kind of 3 areas that we're noticing. Also, new types of agriculture. You could probably call the Natural Products Expo West the regenerative agriculture show.
It's to hit that level. Yep.
Regenerative agriculture was a stock. You'd invest in it, you'd probably double, triple, quadruple your money. So, good stuff.
It's fascinating because I think you and I were talking before the show. I did my first sustainability brochure for an agriculture company 20 years ago. I mean, so it's not a new topic. It's just constantly kind of refining. But every year it seems like it's more and more important. So, I mean, what's happening? Why is it? Is it going to? Are we going to achieve sustainability, or is it just always going to be, something we're striving for?
I think it depends on your perspective. A lot of the farmers have been doing some of these things forever. Farmers have been planting cover crops since they've been farming, but it's become more important because you're having these intense rainstorms. Because as the atmosphere warms, it holds more moisture. And that moisture can all come down at the same time. I'm from upstate New York, western New York. And this past summer, we've had a couple of storms. We had a couple of storms last year where you're getting 3, 4, 5 inches of rain in maybe a half an hour. And you can almost shovel the rain. So you can imagine if you got a farm field and you may have a bare field that doesn't have anything on it, that topsoil is going to end up in the bottom of a river. So I think that's a big thing that, is driving what's going on. And I think companies, they want to be doing the right thing because consumers are looking for the companies to lead the way. It's easier as a consumer to purchase the products from the companies that are doing the right thing than actually doing the hard work yourself and kind of farming it out to these companies.
So folks come to Cullinex and they ask us to work with sustainable ingredients or to help them build their sustainable messages. And so what does that mean for you? I mean, is that ingredients or are those practices, or is it a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of everything. So sourcing ingredients, when you look at regenerative practices, it's taken a while to grow up to be a regenerative practice thing. You either are small enough you can hit small companies, or you're big enough to be a large CPG and own the field to force a regenerative product on the market, which is great, but it misses the middle. There's just not a lot of available ingredients that are regenerative out there that can hit a broad audience unless you have the money to pay for it. If you've got money, you can do a lot of things, right? So as we look at sourcing ingredients, we're trying to be mindful of that, understanding whether or not we can get enough of the product, or if we have to order too much of it, that it's a 5-year supply for a client. So it's a really difficult balance on finding some of those regenerative products. And we've worked on developing regenerative products. We have one that the wheat is grown just north of Seattle, and the crackers are manufactured just south of Seattle. So the production footprint of the cracker itself is relatively small. And then you start looking at the transportation and the carbon footprint it generates after that. We could be mindful of how we develop the products with our production practices, with minimized impacts and low energy yields and stuff like that. But it still is a process. It's still manufacturing. We look at things that may appear good on the outside, but have multiple processing steps therein, thereby increasing it versus something's fresh from the field.
It's like all that energy that goes into processing. So it's interesting that who's going to save the world? Is it going to be the small companies that we all start to love and they have their sustainability messages in their supply chain as possible? Or is it the large companies who are going to make the bigger changes and are going to, have a bigger impact by demanding the supply chain for agriculture?
I think you look at some of how the farmers are compensated and incentivized to do the right thing. When you're a large CPG, you can buy the fields, they're incentivized to do the right thing. If they're not rewarded for doing it, it's harder to actually put your product out there and be a premium product and get a market share on it.
I mean, the farmers do want to do the right thing. They are also trying to use new technologies to make farming more efficient. I mean, if you think about GPS, planting crops using GPS technology so you're not wasting seed or you're not going over the same area twice. Using satellite imagery to figure out, where parts of your field may be drier or wetter and so on. So I think there's a lot of technology coming to bear here. As far as saving the world, saving the earth is going to survive. We may not survive, the earth will survive. So it's really more about self-preservation for humans than is about saving the earth.
So what can large companies do? I mean, what are some of the main things that you're seeing consumers expect large companies to do?
Large companies can probably do a better job of communicating to consumers what they're doing in their supply chains to be more efficient and taking steps to protect the environment. I mean, some companies may already be taking these steps, but they're not really telling the consumer. The consumer wants to know where products come from, where ingredients come from. Maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, companies wouldn't even tell you the state where the ingredient comes from. Today in advertising, you might see a spread product where they're at least telling you the corn ingredient comes from Iowa or Kansas or wherever. So there's a lot more interest in that. And consumers are also doing some of the math, and they know that if you have an ingredient that is traveling thousands of miles, that certainly adds to the footprint, the carbon footprint of the product, and that's not great for the environment. So that's another facet that can be communicated.
It's complicated. So how do consumers understand? I know that certifications certainly can play part of that, but now we have dozens of choices as a CPG company about what kind of certifications and what do consumers know about those certifications?
Certifications, that's an interesting area. We've done Innova, over the course of a year, does almost a dozen consumer surveys. And we're doing these consumer surveys in as many as 35 countries around the world. So we're getting a good idea how consumers feel about things. And in asking consumers, they would like to see one symbol for sustainability. They're confused by multiple symbols about how sustainable a product is. So what you're seeing in countries like Europe, there's a concept called the Nutri-Score there, where you may boil it down to a color-coded score, where a product may be, a 5 or whatnot on a scale 1 to 5. So a system which can communicate that information to consumers more easily than putting a number of labels that demonstrate your sustainability on a product may be easier. You take something like B Corp. There's a lot of companies here that are B corporations. To be a B Corp, it's basically benefit corporation. That's what it means. But to achieve that, you have to be evaluated. You have to get a numeric score over a certain level. But a lot of consumers probably are not understanding the nuance of that. I'd estimate at this show, I suspect a lot of people probably do understand it. But if you go to the man on the street, maybe 5%, 10%.
I think there's a lot of those certifications just like that. So B Corp too is a nice way for business to business work, right? But you're right, from a consumer standpoint, it doesn't necessarily point people in the right direction for how to make the right choices. So it's very interesting. So any other certifications that you think? I mean, we even talked about GMO, right? I mean, that used to be how they don't see non-GMO as much as we used to, and lots of questions around that.
The thing with certifications is that if you look at the future, if you go out a few years and you're like, how is this actually going to change? The European Union is looking at legislation that could kick in as early as 2026, where they may be banning certain labels talking about carbon neutrality, carbon positive, certain things like that. If you have a meat or a dairy product, their reasoning is that it would be impossible to be carbon neutral if you have a product with animal-based inputs. So if that legislation kicks in, one would suspect that you might see something similar in the United States. It may be a better idea for companies to telegraph to consumers, make it tangible. There is a company out there that markets a tortilla chip product that is made with an upcycled ingredient, a corn ingredient, that they're telling the consumer that if you're purchasing this bag, you're saving up to 16 gallons of water a bag because you're not using corn that's grown from scratch. All right. And that's the difference in the saving of the water usage there. And it's an interesting way to communicate that to consumers.
Yeah. Webb taught me the words measurable impact. So, always looking for those measurable impacts that, we can share with the customers and the consumers. So and from an ingredient standpoint, Webb, any examples of work that you've had where there are measurable impacts that have a meaning for consumers? Or,
I mean, we've done a lot of consumer research and consumer groups lately, and speaking on the certifications, a lot of that is so much that it's white noise, where it doesn't mean much to it. And I hear a lot of, well, tell me how I can impact it. Okay, you tell me what the problem is. What can I do about it? And I think there's a little bit of ownership that's needed, or help from the consumer to say, how can they make the impact? I mean, at Culinex, Jeff, a handful of years ago, we started collecting our loose plastic. It's not recyclable through our normal recycling programs, but it's recyclable down the street. So we have a box for loose plastic, and I started doing that at home. How can I make an impact? I'm one person, but I'm doing a little bit against it. So we start looking at things like upcycled ingredients. You start looking at things that can make an impact where you are paying with it, with your dollar, you're making a choice with it. That's what impacts it. I think there's a challenge too with the demographic of who can make an impact. There's a large portion of the population that does not have the right to vote with their money. And so we have to help them be able to vote with their money. And when you start looking at making choices, spending $10 on something or $15 on something, some people don't have the luxury. So how do we help them make that impact from a formulation standpoint, from a ingredient sourcing standpoint, and from a consumer standpoint, or CPG standpoint. So it's got to go from bottom up and top down in order to make those choices.
We certainly talk about trying to figure out our own way to measure each formula. So someone comes in our door, how can we measure that we made that better? I mean, our mission is, about a better planet, healthier people. How can we put a scorecard to that so that you come in and you want to work with us? It's hard. It's hard to try to find those measurable impacts. So let's talk about clean label. And I love this topic partially because, our whole business is based on clean label, but we've also had people say, who makes dirty labels? No one makes dirty labels, right? But clean label is a big deal. And I know you at Informa Markets measure clean label statements. What is included in a clean label statement in your research?
We measure a lot of different product claims here at Nova Market Insights. We take 4 classic claims that collectively are claims that represent clean label: natural and organic, which is good for the Expo West, since it's the natural product show. The other claims that we're tracking that are part of this include non-GMO is another one, and then no additives and preservatives, because consumers equate those with a product that's more processed. And this is becoming kind of a more hot button area because the hot issue in 2024 is ultra processed foods. No one can define them, but there's a lot of talk about them. And I think at this year's IFT show, you're going to see companies talk about that issue. Nobody wants their ingredient to be fingered as ultra processed. And even though we don't quite know what that means, there are some people trying to define it, but this is going to be a big issue for the industry. And clean label, clean label has gone from some really basic claims, like this show, started off as the natural and organic show, and that was novel, back in the late 70s, early 80s, and so on. But it's become so common now that we need the next thing, and that's why you're seeing like regenerative agriculture. Companies are latching onto it because it's sort of the next level. It's clean label 3.0.
So what does clean label mean for you? And let's talk about the ultra processed question. Is that how you define clean label now, or is it still that free from bad things?
Yeah, ultra processed is my soapbox of the century. I think there was a lot of good intent put toward it, but a lot of misalignment on what it means. And some of the labels of foods that are ultra processed, like bacon, is an ultra processed. We've been making that for centuries. It is curing agent, salt, and thyme. How is that ultra processed? A can of beans is ultra processed. It's heat, pressure, and preservation. How is that ultra processed? I think we need to look at what statements are being made against it and what actually counts as ultra processed. There is a large publication that put an article out this week about how ultra processed is poisoning us in our brains and all that other stuff. I think what we really need to look at, my take on it, is portion control. So there's things like a highly seasoned tortilla chip. People are like, what's bad for you? You're eating and you're formulated to crave it. Well, no, you're supposed to eat 11 of those. That's a serving. Serving is 11. When's the last time you took a handful of chips and ate 11 of them? You don't. You sit down to the bag and you chew through them. You take a handful, you take another handful. Now you've consumed more calories than has been recommended for you. It's a portion control thing. It's not about necessarily the processing. I'm not saying they're good for you, but it's clearly stated on the package what the nutritional profile is for 11 chips. And so when you start to sit there and say a can of beans is ultra processed, there's 4 servings in a can of beans. If you're going to eat 4 servings, yes, you're going to have more nutrient density than maybe an apple or a salad or something else that's less processed. I mean, it's still processed. It's harvested. It's washed. It's bagged. It's gas flushed. It's preserved. There's a lot of stuff in there that goes into processing. So I think the conversation, my soapbox, should be shifted toward what is the nutrient content of it and everything in moderation, including moderation.
I actually have to tell a story about what I did just today, right, with you, Webb. We also talk about whole ingredients and how many ingredients. We hear that a lot with brands that are here saying we have few ingredients. So I picked up a product and I went, man, this has like 20 ingredients, and the one I eat, it has 3. And I'm in the industry, in the product development industry, and I still processed in my head that the one I buy with 3 is better. I didn't look at the ingredients to see what they were, but I just saw the number of ingredients and thought, oh, that's bad. That is something that we're doing to ourselves. Anyone that's talking about how few ingredients they have, saying they're better, it's not looking at the value of those ingredients and the quality of the ingredients. It's just counting a number. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and again, back to my bacon example, right? So we've been curing meat for centuries. No one's saying that bacon is healthy. No one's ever said that bacon is healthy. No one's saying that you need to eat a pound of bacon. 3 slices is a good amount. I know it's unhealthy for me from a fat standpoint to eat a lot of it, but it's delicious. And I'm not supposed to eat 10 pieces of it. Maybe 3 is good. It's got salt, water, sugar, and pork in it with smoke. So I know it's a low ingredient count, but it's about the nutrient density that I'm getting out of it. So if I'm going to sit there and pile on the bacon on my plate, I'm making a conscious decision to have a different nutrient profile for my food.
So what does clean label mean?
The thing with clean label is that it means whatever you want it to mean. I remember participating in a company survey pre Innova days where we had about a dozen different options on how a consumer could identify what clean label was. One of them was transparent packaging, believe it or not. There was a few snack bars. I think it was shortly after one of the snack bars that came out with the transparent packaging and was one of the first to do it. It might have been Kind Bar or something to that effect.
I think it was Kind. Yeah, you could see through and see the nuts.
So you could actually see the ingredients, and clean label in that interpretation was actually seeing the real ingredients in the product, but it's a fluid kind of thing. So clean label could mean a low number of ingredients that is quite difficult for companies to pull off, because if you have a label out there and you're telling the consumer that your product only contains 3 ingredients, and then COVID-19 comes along and your number one ingredient is all of a sudden in shortage, what do? I remember one of the first products that came out with that was Häagen-Dazs I think it was Häagen-Dazs. It had 5 ingredients at the time, and it didn't stick around very long, but it was a kind of a gutsy thing to say to the consumer that we only have 5 ingredients. But the other element to this is that consumers regard clean label as ingredients that they can recognize and don't have chemical sounding names. So if the name of the ingredient is carrageenan, nobody's going to the store and buying carrageenan. It may be necessary for the product, but consumers sort of look at that ingredient as that's a highly processed product. So that's another
a measure, right?
We've had consumer insights over and over again tell us that xanthan gum is the devil's tool, and no one will ever buy xanthan gum, and it always has the worst scores. But when presented with a product and put in front of them, people don't have a problem with it. So a word versus a product has been challenging, and we've had clients that have misconceptions of their own. We developed a sauce once where we were not allowed to use onion puree because it was too processed. Instead, we needed to put diced onions in there and saute them for 20 minutes, which essentially made an onion puree. And literally the difference was the particulate of the onion. It's onion pureed, onion diced. And the one that was pureed was more processed when it was just a knife setting. And so thinking through in 20 minutes in a saute kettle is a lot of energy and a lot of carbon footprint. And then this was a bit of time ago. But getting some of those thought processes of even clients, it's a big barrier to overcome for that.
So how do brands make those decisions? So you're faced with, we call it a product design, and you have to make the choices. Or what are the guardrails? What kind of information is available for them for making the choices about the guardrails, about the choices they're going to make that go into the product design?
Well, if you're a product designer, you're looking at, a kind of a field of ingredients you could potentially use for the product. So You may be looking and using the Innova service to find out what's trending, what ingredients are trending. I attended a presentation earlier this week that talked about regional fruits like huckleberry. This is something that's kind of emerging where consumers may be having a soft spot for ingredients that may be more regionalized and are seen as more value added. So that kind of information can be helpful if you're formulating a product and you want it to be a little bit unique and appeal to a consumer that may see it as a little bit more homemade based on some of the ingredients.
Some of the regionality presents a challenge too. We've had call-outs on clients for Oregon strawberry, and then there's a crop failure, and then there's no more Oregon strawberries. And so what do you do about it? You can't put product on the marketplace unless it's that regionality. Huckleberries you can't cultivate a huckleberry. So it's all wild grown. So if you take, and they've tried, you can't cultivate it. So now you've got a wild product that you're trying to mass produce and grow. And a lot of the huckleberries out of the marketplace are really blueberries. So now you're not even clean label, it's a deceiving label.
It's true. And so when you're designing your product and you're just launching, you're making choices about your position, you're choosing which ingredients, you maybe want to have regional flavors. Can you grow? Can you grow? Is the supply chain there to support that business? And those are all, challenges again.
And it is not even necessarily the grow. Before we started this, we're talking about the wacky weather.
Yeah.
You have a bad crop year, strawberries, you don't have strawberries.
So you have to be flexible.
It's just not even there. Or, we had the pandemic and the global supply chain issues where containers were stuck at sea or couldn't get over. You couldn't get a container. A container was $50. Now it's $5,000. And you can't just move product. And so you can't produce an ingredient unless you have that flexibility. So understanding there's a little bit of what can I do here? What can I do there? And our formulation philosophy is food first, technology second, trying to get as much out of the food as you can. And then there's things like xanthan gum that help with viscosity and binding and the functional things of it. But I agree with needing some more regionality of foods. There's a scalability challenge with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is. And talking about ingredients that might be in short supply, I mean, you talk about crop failures. I think Michigan had a cherry crop failure, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I'm from Western New York, upstate New York. We had a year without apples. The apple trees blossomed in April, which was ahead of time. We had some 80-degree weather in April. They blossomed, had a frost in May. You didn't have any apples. It also happens with wineries with some of the varietal grapes. The grapes blossom too soon. All of a sudden, you don't have Riesling grapes for wine.
You got to be nimble.
We had a great crop year of cherries when you're in Washington and not enough people to pick them. So there's enough cherries that couldn't get off the trees before they rotted on it. So, it's difficult to hinge a product line without some flexibility on it. And we've worked with plums before too. And if it rains too early, there's no blossoms, no plums.
I remember we had a webinar that you did, Webb, and we talked about the strategies for supply chain challenges. And sometimes it means setting that package aside, repairing a new package, or, missing store shelf opportunities. And those are challenges when you have regenerative agriculture, that products that maybe we can't get. We also did some development for a company that was pretty early in the regenerative agriculture. And you found, again, finding enough product for them to grow as their business grew was a real challenge.
And that client ended up having to work with the grower, and they weren't regenerative at the time. They were a step here, a step there for measurable impacts and measuring the soil and no-till and all the other things. And they were able to work with the grower in order to get the right pieces in place to get the right fields going. But they were small enough, and the farmer was small enough. If they were any larger, that wouldn't have happened because the systems are not in place. So I think we're correct with Tom is that once you get these infrastructures set up, the regenerative will start gaining ground and moving with it. But you're either small enough to be flexible with it or large enough to buy the fields outright.
I think it's really important that large CPGs, this is the soapbox part, right, really supports the upcycle community and helps to make that happen and starts using products and oftentimes it's large CPG that has the waste product that can then be upcycled. So they're not, maybe they're not using the product, but they're making a way for the product to be used for someone else. I think those are all really important steps that can be made towards sustainability for sure. Anything else we want to add?
Talking about ingredients, just talking to companies on the show floor, one of the areas that's in growth mode is adaptogenic ingredients. I mean, ingredients that if you're feeling stress, they'll calm you down. If you need energy, they'll provide you with energy. My understanding is that some of these ingredients are wild harvest and they can't be grown. So you've got something that's trending and all of a sudden you're encountering an ingredient shortage. So, that can be a real challenge.
From the very beginning, there's no hope. Yeah, choices.
I think in that aspect, you're trying to figure out what your growth model is. If you have a wild harvest, you're limited what you can. And so are you going to be an X dollar a year company for forever and you go with that because you are making an impact on the environment, on the people and things like that, and you're not in it for profit as much?
Some businesses are here and they're thinking about their exit strategy, and others are here, possibly to make a difference, is just stay and create a business for themselves and their family and their staff. So, growth is a big part of, getting outside of the availability of certain ingredients. So these are all choices. So interesting. Anything else? Well, thank you both. I appreciate your time. And as always, we love talking about Clean Label, and sustainability has been, a big trend watch at this show for a long time. So thank you so much for joining us, Tom. Great information. And we absolutely love the informal market services that we get from you, and we use it in all of our development work. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to be a part of this.